Well, good morning and welcome back to the videos here at the AQR class by Coach Primo. The bell ringer today, and we're starting a new unit on statistical studies. The first lesson is a 3-day lesson, overview of purpose, design, and studies. This is day 1. The bell ringer is, if you wanted to know how to start a new business in a new city, what is the best means to determine if that business is a venture worth pursuing? Now, a lot of people would say, well, we'd have to know a lot about the demographics. We'd have to know a lot about what kind of businesses are already there. We'd have to know a lot about what kind of competition. Well, how do you think they get that information? They would probably have to conduct a survey. And that's exactly what they would need to do. So the best way to do it is they would determine the value in pursuing a specific venture is to conduct a statistical investigation of current businesses of that type. One way to do that would be to conduct a survey. All right, so let's move on. Good things. Let's hear a good thing. Today is my daughter's 11th birthday. She was born on this day in 2008. So, is that right? 2008? Yeah, 11th birthday, because it's 2019. Hello. Anyway. Yep, my daughter is 11. So here we go. Let's go on. Okay, so let's talk about this for a second. Music is a large part of many people's lives. Because of this, it is often the subject of study. For example, music industry's executives want to know what will be popular with different age groups. Advertisers want to know which radio stations are the most popular. Why would they want to know that? So they can advertise on it, because if they're popular, more people listen, more people hear their commercials and possibly use their products. Doctors want to know how much hearing damage results from loud music. Okay, that's probably true. And teachers want to know whether or not listening to classical music helps students perform better on tests. Let's check stuff out. All right, so say you're a researcher for a radio station. What questions would you ask of music enthusiasts? And how does the age of the person that you ask matter? And for the questions you identify, what type of data do you believe needs to be collected and analyzed? Now, the answers to these questions would definitely vary greatly depending on who the researcher was and what the study was needed for. So I would venture to say that the demographics, like the age of the person, the race, that kind of information, gender, all that kind of matters generally, but it does if you're trying to reach a specific audience. So, for instance, say that you're trying to sell horchata. You're going to want to know what kind of Hispanic people pay attention to the radio. So you're trying to target that specific demographic, Hispanic people that drink horchata, or anybody that drinks horchata. You probably wouldn't do that in a sanguine area in the middle of the country that has no Hispanic people. And a radio station that broadcasts out there probably won't do you any good for your company. So, all right, statistical investigations are used every day for a variety of reasons. Now, think before you answer or even ponder this question, what are the purposes of statistical investigations? When you think about that, give some examples of some statistical investigations with which you are familiar. Now, remember, we did a statistical investigation just recently. That major project you're still finishing up. Some of you have finished. That was a statistical investigation. We're looking to see what kind of people, how people perform on a specific carnival game. So let's look at this graphic. This graphic is kind of interesting, and I would subject this to memory. Definitely something you want to put on your notes to study for your exam. This is the research cycle, and this graphic illustrates the process of planning and implementing a statistical investigation. So first of all, a question or a series of questions sparks the interest of a researcher. The research team then decides on the best design for the investigating that particular question. So notice that it shows no obvious ending point or starting point. And what do you think that means? Well, it may start one time with a question, but you may get through the design and you realize, oh, this is not going to work. And you have to revisit, start collecting data and that collected data is flawed, or it has some kind of error in it, and you have to go back and redesign it. So, it doesn't stop. It keeps going. It can start anywhere. You could have a current situation going on, and you're like in the middle of analyzing collected data and realize, oh, this is not what we wanted, and have to go back and revisit the design again. So there is no obvious starting point, and it never ends because there's always a question that might pop up, or there might be a design flaw that needs to be repaired. The data we might find out that actually has some flaw in it, some kind of skewed data that would cause it to be a problem. The means to be analyzed might be biased. We'll talk about that in the future. And the reporting might be done incorrectly. It might be given to the wrong people. So you give information to the wrong people into the wrong hands, and bad things tend to happen. All right, so consider the following example of a type of statistical investigation. This is example 1. Radio rating services sometimes collect data on listenership by asking participants to record the date, time, and station each time they listen to the radio. Other rating services distribute monitoring devices that automatically record this information anytime the participant has their radio turned on. And still others call participants and ask them about their listening habits. The data are then compiled so that advertisers know which stations are the most popular at specific times during the day. Now, each of these approaches is an example of an observational study. An observational study is some study that collects data about some characteristics of the population. And that data is collected by very specific means. Observation. The researcher can just observe and take notes about the situation. By a study or an interview, you can talk to people on the phone or in person regarding a specific situation and gather information and data that way. A monitoring device is another means. So, for instance, I know this sounds kind of trite, but an ankle bracelet, whatever you want to call it, is a statistical device. It monitors where a person goes, and it keeps those statistics in the hands of the people that need to monitor that person. So, all right, describe an observational study in your own words. So an observational study is a research in which, so think about this for a second. There are certain qualifiers for observational study. One of them is actually a survey. If you are conducting a survey with a specific demographic of people, a sample set, you will know that that is an observational study. We'll get into why it's not an experimental study when we discover what and define what an experimental study is. An observational study simply observes or records information through an interview or a survey, or it monitors specific things happening. That's it. Okay, so consider this example as a type of statistical investigation. This is the second example. A 17-year-old student designed a science fair project with 72 mice randomly assigned to 3 groups: hard rock music, Mozart, and no music at all, called a control group. The mice in the first 2 groups were exposed to music 10 hours a day, 3 times a week. All the groups of mice were timed as they ran through a maze. An analysis of the results showed that the 24 mice in the no music group averaged about a 5-minute improvement in their maze completion time, while the Mozart mice improved to 8.5 minutes. The hard rock mice actually got slower, an average of 4 times slower. Here's another interesting fact. The student had to start his experiment over because the first time all the hard rock mice killed each other. None of the classical mice did that. This is an actual study, and as you can see, M. Wirtz in 1998 actually conducted the study. This is an example of an experimental study. In an experimental study, the researcher separates the participants into 1 or more groups and applies some sort of treatment. After treatment, a variable of interest is measured as the results are compared. So give me just a moment. Okay, sorry about that. Someone was knocking at my door. An experimental study is very easy to determine. If a treatment is given, if a group of the people being studied, or a group of the animals, or a group of the plants, or a group of whatever the sample set is being studied, is given some sort of treatment, medicine, rainwater instead of tap water and that kind of stuff. That is an experiment, and we're looking at the difference between a group of people in the experiment that did not get the treatment, the control group, and the difference of the people that did get the treatment group, and look at the differences between their results. Okay, that variable of interest is measured, and the results are compared between the control group and the treatment group. All right. What are the treatment and variable of interest in this case? The treatment, of course, is the music that is played for 10 hours a day to some mice. And the variable of interest is the maze completion time for each group of mice. You can see that experiment is pretty cut and dry. Different mice are played different music, and a group of mice are not played any music, and they look and see how fast they can complete the maze for each group that's given the different treatment. Okay. So describe an experimental study in your own words. An experimental study is a research in which, and you need to fill in the blank there, it's easy to understand when you say it in your own words. So observational and experimental studies have many components that must be planned, such as sampling and data collection procedures, and then the data must be collected, the results analyzed, and the conclusions reported. So refer back to the research cycle graphic. And why is there an arrow after the report box? Because the research cycle never really ends. That's why it's called a cycle. It continues on. Once we report, we may want to consider looking at another part of the question and looking at that specific area and go through the whole entire research cycle again, design another survey or another experiment, observe or collect the data based on the information of the either survey or the experiment, analyze that data, and then we'll report back on it. And it continues on, and there's really no end to the cycle. So I'm going to launch you with this. Knowing why studies are performed gives insight into how they reach their conclusions. It may actually open our eyes in the actual reasons researchers pursue their data so passionately. So if you look here, this is a bunch of different books that talks about social research methods. Obviously, doing research on human people is by far and large a very social aspected research study. You have to actually talk to people, and it doesn't matter how good of a doctor you are. If you don't have that kind of bedside manner, those social research methods are not, they're not going to work. You're not going to get anything out of it because people aren't going to respond to what you need. Unless, of course, an experiment, and we'll talk about the means in which people actually do that. There are different ethical things that you'll have to cover, and we'll talk about that in a further lesson later on. In the meantime, there's a lesson in the Google Classroom. Be sure to get on it, and be blessed. Be a blessing.